Hey guys, how's it going? Welcome to my video. All right, so we are going to be talking about the ignition switch of your vehicle. If you guys have issues with no starts and your radio is not working, etc., stalling issues, no power to the radio or accessories. It could be an indication that your ignition switch is your problem. So, contrary to what people might think, the ignition switch is not what your key goes into. That is called the lock cylinder. The ignition switch essentially sits directly behind that lock cylinder, and it has three main functions. Essentially what it does, it powers the accessories. This should be what you get when you turn the key to the first position. This pretty much allows you to use the power windows, radio, and other accessories that is equipped in your car. It also acts to start your vehicle. The positive activates your ignition system and the fuel pump, and at this point the fuel is pressurized at the fuel rails and the engine is ready to fire the plugs when it turns over. And also it actually activates your starter, which when you turn it to I believe it's the third position, it starts your car, it initiates the starter. So essentially that switch is in rest when it rests in the ignition position when your car is running. The ignition position is when your car starts up. And let's go to what the common symptoms are for a bad ignition switch. All right, if you have one that's failing, it's possible that your car could stall on the road. And the most noticeable symptom of a bad ignition switch is that. So basically it stalls because the switch turns off the fuel pump or power to the ignition, and when this happens, obviously the engine's not going to get any fuel and it just stalls out. Also, if you try to start it and it dies right away, then that's also an indication that your ignition switch is bad. And essentially this is what happens. You're not getting power to ignition or fuel pump while the key rests in the run position, but you are getting it when the starter is engaged. So you hit the starter, everything has power, you release the key, and your car immediately dies. Or you could get into this situation where it won't work at all. It can cause their car not to start and keep your car from starting in a couple of different ways. The first is when the starter cranks, but the bad ignition switch doesn't turn on the fuel pump ignition. The engine would just turn over with no spark. The second way is when the starter doesn't turn at all, and this can be frustrating because the starter that doesn't turn over at all is usually caused by a bad battery or a bad starter, and just diagnosing that is a little bit on the complicated side if your ignition switch is the problem. You could also get a lack of power to accessories. The ignition switch is responsible for sending power to accessories. So if you find yourself in a situation where your car runs but nothing else works, it might be a bad ignition system causing your issues. And there are a few parts of the electrical system that work without the key at all for safety reasons, such as the headlights, the brake lights, horn, and the dome lights. However, things such as the power window, but not the power lock, sunroof, radio, rear defrost, and climate control all going to depend on that ignition switch for power. If several of them go bad at once, it's time to test the ignition switch to see whether it's bad. Also, a bad ignition switch could drain the battery. The opposite of having the power not go into the accessory, fuel pump, ECM, and ignition is having them continue to get power even though the key has been turned to the off position. So essentially, if you guys do have this problem, and if you guys have the symptoms, you guys have those symptoms, you guys definitely want to check the ignition switch to make sure that it's working properly.